Welcome to Living in Fiction. I'm your host, Arthur Aguirre. I'm a professor in leadership and communication. Living in Fiction is an edutainment podcast where we look at some of the best movies, some of our favorite movies, and some ridiculous movies to see what we've learned to avoid, and what's inspired us. We are on to Season 3, Episode 4 of My Bear Rewatch. And I don't want to waste any time. Usually with these Season 3 episodes, I've really just been focusing on primarily, there's maybe like a few minor things that I talk about, but I've been finding that there's like one major thing in every episode that I've been able to lock in on, and this episode is no different. So let's get into it. The episode is called Violet. The episode starts with a weird scene between Carmen and Claire. Sydney moves into her first apartment. We get a glimpse of Richie's relationship with his daughter and Tiffany's fiance. Carmen and Sid talk about communication, and the staff finds out the Tribune is doing a review after already visiting the bear. So I want to focus on, for this episode, there is a conversation that happens between Carmen and Sydney, and it feels like things that I've talked about in the last couple episodes. Sid finally wants to address them. And I literally wrote word for word how this conversation goes, because I think it highlights a couple things. One, Sid does a really great job highlighting the issue. She is trying to show Carmen that he's not communicating. In my experience, when people say that they're, ask what's the biggest problem at your job, or if a organization is asking me to audit their organization for their communication and leadership, before I start, I'll ask, like, what would you say is what are some of your main issues? And without question, the most common response is we have bad communication. There's a lot of different ways of defining what that actually is. Is it there's no communication? Are people avoiding difficult conversations? Is there passive aggressiveness? There's a lot of things that could be going on. And right now, clearly there is some sort of bad, quote unquote, bad communication going on at the bear. And so Sydney broaches the conversation because Carmen has changed the menu once again without consulting anyone. So it goes like this. Apologies for me reading it to you like it's a children's storybook, but just follow along with me. Carmen explains that he changes the dish from a habanero to a scotch bonnet. Sid, clearly through her nonverbals, explains or indicates that she's bothered, right? Whatever emotion you want to attribute, because I think that's important too. Oftentimes people will make the assumption like, oh, well, you're mad or you're angry or you're whatever it might be, but there are just so many different names for emotions, whether you're upset, you're frustrated, whatever it might be, that some folks just their blanket statement is mad or angry, or, Carmen says pissed off. That Sydney is trying, you can see right away her wheels are spinning, and she's trying to best how to approach the situation. And he says something like, well, it's a different kind of pepper. She says, I know it's a pepper. That's not the point. The point is you changed it. Carmen says, why don't you try it before you get pissed? If you want to change it back, you can. And she's very calm during this exchange. She says, I'm not pissed. You can't just change. Okay, you know what? Fine. I know that it's good. I know that it's better even, which I think this is a really great approach. First of all, you're explaining the fact that what you're doing in this moment, like the decision that you made, is not a bad decision. In fact, it's probably a great decision. But that's not the point. She's saying that, and she clearly outlines that. And so she's giving him that validation of what you wanted to change was good. The point is something that you're not going to want to talk about, which I think illustrates that it really is a point. This communication between front and back of house is killing us. Carmen's first instinct when hearing that is to be defensive and shift the blame to someone else. He says, well, Richie's out of his mind, so. And she pivots and really doesn't just say, no, it's your fault. She gives him an example. She says, okay, sure, but 5 minutes ago, I had Nat type and print out menus because I was told, and she was told that the menu was locked. In that time, did you tell her or anyone else that the menu was not in fact locked, that there would be a change? He pauses, he says no, and then says, that's bad communication. She responds, says, yes, thank you. And then there's this quick subject change. Carmen asks her if she got the place or apartment, and she says yes. you only did half the work there, right? It's great that you figured out what the problem was. He has now acknowledged there is bad communication. The follow-up is what's missing. And I see this in interpersonal relationships. I see this in work relationships. It is one thing to acknowledge what the problem is, but that's not helpful if you don't have a solution, and not just a blanket general, I'm going to get better at communicating solution. You need a tangible thing like, okay, what does that look like? Okay, that means he could have said, from now on, when I say something is locked, there's no more changes. And that kind of, he has to hold himself accountable. He's giving everyone else the reassurances that they are not going to look dumb and waste resources, because, the next episode is them trying to figure out why they're spending so much money. And even something as small as having to reprint all these menus is part of that. So when you are having these types of conversations, it's important to give a tangible goal, a tangible change that someone can look at, whether it's a timeline, whether it's actual actions that are going to be taken, that you're saying that you're going to do. And what's funny is the next scene right afterwards, Richie does something very similar. Him and Nat are talking about all sorts of stuff. And he brings up his daughter, and he's wondering if he should be taking a step back, if it's weird that he's around, and Sugar is telling him, no, it's not. And she asks him, what does Evie think about all this? And he says, she thinks I'm alone. And Sugar says, are you? And then it's a quick subject change to whether they made the week at the restaurant. And I think it's helpful in understanding that, because it shows that maybe a lot of the guys in this restaurant have very similar patterns of communication, that once they're to a certain degree being held accountable, they just quickly want to shift and change the subject. Because it's hard. In that moment, Carmen is having to face the reality that he messed up, that he is messing up, that a lot of these problems are because of him. And that's, for a lot of us, that's an ugly feeling to have to sit with, knowing that you screwed up in some way, shape, or form. But it's important that if you care about these people, you acknowledge that. And it's even more important that you come up with steps, tangible steps on how to get better. From now on, moving forward, I will be doing X, Y, and Z. It can't just be, I'm going to get better. I'm going to try harder. That sounds great, but that doesn't show any kind of path forward. You need to have tangible steps. So that is my big takeaway from episode 4 of season 3. I hope you've been enjoying this. I've been having a blast going through this, and I love teaching. And so if I can continue to do what I'm doing, what I do in my classrooms, and bring it here, for those of you who have been watching and following along, thank you so much. So come in back next week, and I'll be going over episode 5 of season 3.